democracy in peacebuilding, lessons from Sri Lanka, and finally Dr.R.Ramesh, senior lecturer in political science at the University of Vavuniya. He will speak on youth radicalization in Sri Lanka, understanding the causes, consequences, and solutions. Let us solicit the chairpersons and the speakers of the panel discussion onto the stage. Let's explore the diverse perspectives on the important discussion topic. Now I hand over the session to Professor Aslam. Over to you, Professor.
Democracy in peacebuilding, particularly lessons from Sri Lanka, Jehan Perera, about how the history in Sri Lanka whole is no doubt holding rule of law and democracy is step one for influence in the country. However, our history, mainly after independence in 1948, has been a checkered path when it comes to peace building, or I will go a little further and say nation building for sustainable peace in the country. The independence constitution that we speak of, the 1948 constitution or constitution that was given to us by the British colonialists, had certain features which ensured the democratic norms and values as well as the rule of law to be maintained. I identified mainly two constitutional mechanisms which ensured this. One, the Constitution provided for a limited government. The government was not having unfettered power. As a result, with the Constitution having a section on non-discrimination, the judiciary was in a position to clip the wings of the legislature, which, as you know, as Dr. Jehan said, represented almost 75, more than 75% of the majority community, to ward off any legislative measures which are discriminatory against minorities. There was a provision included in the Constitution. And that also ensured the maintenance of rule of law and democracy in the country. Because through creative judicial interpretation, it was not expressly mentioned in the Constitution, but the courts of Sri Lanka as well as then appellate body, Privy Council in the United Kingdom, were in the position to invoke an inherent jurisdiction to check the validity of laws passed by Parliament. Particularly if the laws were contravening this non-discriminatory provision in the Constitution, they were in a position to strike those laws down. That is to protect rule of law and also to ensure the pluralism that should be followed in the democratic process. Second, so judicial review was there, limited government was part of it. Second, they also left us public service, independent judicial service. So people were in a position to seek relief from the public service and the judicial service if the public service failed to provide that relief to the judicial service. But the checkered history of Sri Lanka vis-a-vis peace-making or peace-building or nation-building has been that the judiciary upheld the rule of law when it comes to common breaches of rule of law. When it comes to if, so for instance, the legislature passed a retroactive law to punish people who attempted to overthrow the government. The judiciary said, no, that is against the rule of law, otherwise the constitution can't make that law. Upheld the rights of those people. But when it came to minority issues, even the judiciary failed to uphold the constitution. No sooner than we gained independence, a sizable population of Sri Lanka, we sometimes call upcountry Tamils or Tamils of recent Indian origin, who inhabit the upcountry's area in the country, their franchise was removed by an act called Citizenship Act. They were in a position, before independence, they were in a position to elect 8 members of parliament with their votes in the legislature which would take 91. So they were in a position to be kingmakers. They could ensure their rights and interests by saying, if you are going to make these things, we will support the other party. So, when the independence was obtained, the first legislation passed by the government was to disenfranchise them. And they went to the judiciary under Article 29(2) because that is discriminating against one community. That, unfortunately, the judiciary in Sri Lanka as well as in the United Kingdom did not see it that way. This is the beginning of loss of confidence in the systems followed and practiced by the rulers. Then thereafter, with the decision in their back, they were in a position to pass Sinhala only Act. Although Tamil and Sinhala were the languages of the natives, they said official language will be Sinhala only. And that left majority of people, Tamils, to leave or to be resentful of the government. And in a sense, these two acts are not nation building. They were excluding particular communities of the nation. We don't want to. We want only people who can speak Sinhala to be in the public service. Who can work in Sinhala to be in the public service. A process of exclusion, not inclusion, was practiced. Right? This led to so many things, and in 1970s, earlier, there was a JVP rebellion. And since then, we have been ruled under emergency than at the moment. We were breathing emergency air, not normal air in the country. After 2009 only, we started getting back. In fact, I will say in 1979, a temporary Provisions Act, Prevention of Terrorism Act, called temporary provision, but still it is going from 1979 now almost 45 years, a temporary provisions act is still in operation. Right? Then came the 1972 Act. That is the main straw where peacebuilding, peacemaking became impossible in the country because it completely removed all limitations that were placed on the legislature under the independence constitution. As a result, the legislature became the supreme instrument of state power, can do anything and everything. They can't be questioned by the commission. Laws passed by the legislature cannot be questioned for their validity. The 1978 Constitution, I am looking at the time because I have to keep my time. 1978 Constitution changed the parliamentary democratic system to a presidential executive system. Where from legislature having supreme power, the executive became heavily loaded with power without any accountability to parliament. Although the president is said to be responsible, but accountability is that of the cabinet, not that of the president. But there are two fundamental constitutional mechanisms which undermine our democratic principles and values in the country. That is not done by a particular president, by the constitution itself. That is, if the member of parliament is expelled by his political party, he or she will lose the membership in parliament. That sends an internal fear to the members. If we speak out of turn and if we are expelled, we lose our membership in parliament. So they lost their independence, they lost their freedom to express. There is executive presidency in the United States, but the Congress is not controlled by the president. So here the president, in the initial stages, before an important bill is taken up in parliament, he will have a meeting, president will have a meeting with the parliament, government parliamentary group to tell, I want this law to be passed, go ahead. Right? So they know if we suggest an amendment or if we go there, they lose their seat in parliament. So this time, that is one. Second, under the 1972 Constitution, the Independent Public Service Commission had been disbanded. There was no Independent Public Service Commission. Only an advisory board was there. The entire power was given to the cabinet. So there was a time when I was a small child. If a public servant has gone for canvassing for a political party, and a complaint is made to the Public Service Commission, he will be immediately interdicted. Inquiry will be held and he will be dismissed. After 72, a minister or an MP is going for canvassing, he finds out, you are from that area, he is a civil servant, and you are from that area, come with me. If he refuses, he will be sent to me. Because the cabinet has the power. The table turned. Right? Now, we are facing that the democratic norms are not followed in this country, the rule of law is not followed in this country because the members of the public service think that the public service is for the government of the day, not state service. There is not distinction between that they are permanent public servants, these people, government members are seasonal people. They come and they go, but we need to ensure independent objectivity and service to the people. But they think they are servants of the government of the day, the political party that is in there. Right? So what I would suggest is that if we need to ensure, we need to bring in limited government. We need to ensure an independent public service. But it's not easy because we have around 1,300, rather 1,300,000 public servants who have been, say, They are all politicized public service. The culture is that they need to listen to. I am a member of Public Service Commission now. We are trying our level-based distribution, but it is very difficult. The health department, the secretaries, the higher level people, they are under the culture of when the minister says, how can I go with that? Although it is very clear that they should not do that. Right? The third thing which is afflicting our we don't have an anti-corruption commission or anti-bribery commission like Singapore, like or South Korea. Right? That is also really a very ill element which is afflicting and eating into our society and the governance of the country. I will end my listing with an anecdotal story that former Singapore Prime Minister was asked to speak at an election meeting. He said, when I assumed duties, I had two options. One is to look after the interest, to be honest, look after the interest of my, rather, look after the, not honest, look after the interest of myself and my family and become one of the richest person in the world. Or, second option, look after the welfare of the people and the country and then make Singapore as one of the 10 economically sound democracies in the world. And he chose the second option. He said he decided to select and follow it. And that is what Singapore. So when our politicians were asked, yeah, we also have two options. But the first option is the only option available because second option has been taken by Singapore Prime Minister. So we had left it only one. So we are corrupting the country. This is the state of things. So these are the steps we need to take if we have to bring the country back on correct track to uphold democracy, uphold the rule of law, toward building. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for 2018 and then 2020 before the COVID-19 pandemic. So when we talk about youth radicalization and violent extremism, I would like to remind the report made by United Nations in the plan of action to prevent violent extremism. It says, violent extremism undermines our collective efforts towards maintaining peace and security, fostering sustainable development, protecting human rights, promoting rule of law, and taking human rights action. So it has become a huge threat for peace and sustainable development, human rights and reconciliation across the world. And I would also like to give some theoretical insights with regard to radicalization. What does mean by radicalization? So radicalization as a personal process in which individuals adopt extreme political, social and religious ideas and aspirations. And they try to achieve their intended goals in an indiscriminate way of violence. And it is also both a mental and an emotional process that prepares an individual to pursue violent behavior. And at the same time, radicalization as a process of developing extremist ideologies. One can develop extremist ideologies, one can also associate with extremist groups, and thereby they will develop their beliefs, extremist beliefs, and that also lead to some kind of pathways to radicalization in many parts of the world. So the pathways is the process of engaging in violent extremist actions. And also, if you look at some other theoretical insights about violent extremism, it is also about individuals' psychological vulnerability and the intense need for recognition by a particular community or group bias as a major factor for radicalization. according to some of the available empirical evidence. So conditions for radicalization and violent extremism combine with a host of psychological, emotional, material and group-based mechanisms to produce 8 sufficient pathways for violent extremism. But in this presentation, I will be speaking about only major 6 pathways for violent extremism or radicalization in the Sri Lanka. And I also would like to establish very clear causal relationship between these 6 push factors from the Sri Lankan perspective. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, based on our study which we conducted in 2018 and 2020. Actually, in one of these surveys, we involved 3,000 samples across, eastern, southeastern, central, northern part of Sri Lanka. And we actually employed, we adopted 3-layer data collection process. We did survey, also involved some key informants, interviews, focus group discussions in 4 provinces of Sri Lanka. And let me draw your attention over the key findings of the studies. Actually, we asked the youth to what extent their expectations in the post-war context have been met. So this is the response that we gained from the youth respondents. Only 8% of the respondents stated that their expectations have been fully accomplished in the post-war context. And in terms of ethnicity, you can see the variation. Sinhalese 27, Sri Lankan Tamils 12%, and Muslims 27, and Afghan Tamils 11 stated that their needs have been met to a large extent in the post-war scenario. And he also asked the youth whether violent extremism is the main factor that threatens political, economic, and social stability in Sri Lanka in the post-war conflict. And around 23% answered affirmative, and 36% agreed with this statement to some extent. So there exists actually regional variation as well. You can see in the south 26%, north 38%, the east 47%, and in the central province only 30% agree with this statement. So more than 60% of respondents consider violent extremism as a prime factor and a pathway in threatening socio-economic political stability in Sri Lanka, especially in the post-war context. And now I would like to draw the first push factor for youth radicalization in Sri Lanka. So the question of employability and daily survival remains a central concern among many youth in Sri Lanka in the post-war context. Because political affiliation and nepotism are very clearly established in granting public sector employments in Sri Lanka. So therefore there is a kind of imbalance in the employment industry. So it creates a kind of dissatisfaction and frustration among youth, which is more likely to push them towards radicalization. And youth tend to involve in violent extremism for economic gain, which is very visible in the current situation in Sri Lanka because of the economic crisis caused by poor governance or malgovernance over the last decades. So a significant gap we can see between the employment aspirations and the job opportunities available in the market. Because you can see the access to education is largely increasing in Sri Lanka, participation in the higher education is significantly increasing in Sri Lanka over the last couple of decades. Right? Even now we are admitting 43,000 students to 16 state universities in Sri Lanka. But if you look at the job availability of the jobs and the aspiration of the graduates in the job market, there's a significant anomaly or discrepancy in this regard. So the criminality and gang violence are some of the secondary effects of mass unemployment among youth and a prevalent feature of post-war Sri Lanka. So this push factor has historical underpinnings as well, because in 1970s and late 80s we had 2 youth-led insurrections in Sri Lanka, which were basically led by unemployed youth and to fight against poverty. And then we have corruption and malgovernance. That is another key area of concern when we talk about violent extremism in Sri Lanka. Because when there is corruption and malgovernance, youth are pushed to take different means to fight against government, which we actually have experienced in Sri Lanka. Hundreds of thousands of youth mobilized to cover the government in 2022. So our results also indicate very clearly that corruption and all forms of malpractices, driving culture, at the political and social levels push you to take violent means or illegal means to fight against the government. So political instability and the breakdown of paternalism are more likely to induce radical violence among youth in the post-war context. And it is very clear from the study that poor governance remains a potential push factor for corruption and youth violent extremism. Because poor governance and ineffective public and political institutions produced and reproduced marginality at the local level in caste, gender, political and party-based prejudices. So as actually argued by APPRA, sometimes that state actually makes the nation's youth radicalized and has to be very clearly responsible for this process. Because weak states have more propensity to encourage and provide avenues for youth to radicalize in the Sri Lankan context. So there's a very clear causal connection between this. And even during the interviews, many significant number of percentage of respondents stated that politicians are mostly corrupt. Most of the politicians are true. Politicians serve their own interests, and generally speaking, this country is run by big interests. That was the response given by many of the youth during our interviews. And then ethnocentrism and political drivers for violent extremism in Sri Lanka is another concern, because Sri Lanka is quite popular for ethnocentrism, ethnic nationalism. It's part of our political culture as well. So the resurgence of ethno-nationalism and identity politics in the post-war period of Sri Lanka seems to induce violent extremism among youth. Because 33% of youth are the view that exaggerated ethnic-centrism in political and public life remains the same in the pre-war period, and only 12% believe that it has disappeared significantly after the post-war. So a quarter of the respondents believe that exaggerated ethnocentrism is slowly deepening in Sri Lanka in the post-war context. That is very visible after the Easter Sunday bombing, how it has been deepened in Sri Lanka, and how people were actually mobilized in line with ethnicity, religion after the Easter Sunday bombing. And analysis of actually our evidence, qualitative evidence basically shows that this feeling is very much high among youth in the northern province. And youth in the northern province are particularly concerned about devolving powers to the provincial councils, because there is no very clear power sharing mechanism in this country. It is completely missing. So therefore, they are very much concerned about a clear power sharing mechanism for the provincial councils in Sri Lanka, which will actually address some grievances of the minorities in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka. And certain political parties actually promoting communal differences in line with ethno-religious identity. We can see this election campaign. So this is not only the problem in the southern part of Sri Lanka, even we can see this pattern in the northern and the upcountry areas where these major political parties are promoting communal differences during the election campaign to win their vote bases, so to secure their vote bases. And then we are moving to social exclusion, which is also another push factor for violent extremism, as Dr. Jehan correctly mentioned. Since the independence, our successive governments and states of this country have failed miserably in building inclusive Sri Lankan society. Language can be one example, and the Citizenship Act of 1947 is another example. So we can list out various factors which actually led to state failure in Sri Lanka. So this exclusion is very much prevalent in the Sri Lankan society, especially among minorities. And also during the study, we were able to find out the prevalence of social exclusion among former LTTE cadres. They have been completely excluded from their own community, and they are not integrated fully into their own society. So they seem to have some kind of grievances, feeling of injustice, and perceived discrimination in the socio-political and economic process. So this relative deprivation and frustration is more likely to push them into violent extremism. And at the same time, our respondents feel that more than 58% of the respondents felt that combination of those factors propelling youth towards violent extremism have either remained the same or strengthened in the post-war, in the pre-war period. So we can't see any differences between these push factors before the war and after the civil war. So that should be taken into account seriously when we think about fighting against violent extremism. And this is another pattern that we can see after the civil war in Sri Lanka, that is religious radicalization and violent extremism. Since the end of civil war, we could observe series of anti-Muslim violence across the country in Sri Lanka, which were led by some of the radicalized or extremist religious groups in this country. I have given some of the names of these religious or radical extremist religious groups in Sri Lanka. They led this anti-Muslim violence across the country. And also we can see some kind of, radicalized extremist religious groups among the Muslims in Sri Lanka. And also there is another group in the northern which is quite popular, we call it Awa gang, which is a kind of motorcycle gang started in 2013. They are also part of violent activities or activism in the northern part in the recent past. So we get a lot of media reporting about this group, how they are involved in various illegal activities and the gang violence. And then final pushback is the presence of security forces and the militarized ethnocracy in the northern part of Sri Lanka. So a significant military presence is very much visible in the northern part of Sri Lanka since the end of civil war. Government is saying that they are going to reduce the military presence in the northern part of Sri Lanka, but it is not happening in a true sense. So continuing the military presence is a kind of push factor for radicalization among youth, because people are tired or people dislike the presence of military in their daily life, civilians' life. So they are also part of involving in agriculture and other business activities in the northern part of Sri Lanka by grabbing the civilians' lands. So large scale of lands are occupied by military still, though they are partly released by the successive government. So this kind of enemy image is still there in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka with regards to military presence. So this is a kind of, and at the same time we can also see slowly a kind of colonization that are taking place in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka. Sinhalese are being settled in many places in the north and east. So which is also going to create some kind of antagonism among these two ethnic groups. Eventually that will lead to some kind of radicalization among youth. So these are some kind of, and at the same time I would like to highlight the Sri Lankan state is becoming more and more national security state. So we can see that tendency over the last couple of months. The government is in the process of enacting new laws, the online safety bill, anti-terrorism bill and others, and the rehabilitation bill and so on. So thereby the state is becoming more and more national security state. So that is the case in India and Bangladesh. The states are becoming more and more national security state. Thereby they are trying to prevent all kinds of people's mobilization, popular uprising and mobilization. And that actually partly protects the state from citizens, civil activism or civil society activism and youth mobilization. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight a couple of things. That is, you can see a kind of clear causal mechanism between these push factors. That is, unemployment and poverty are a clear causal connection to corruption and poor governance, which leads to exclusions and marginality. And in contrast, you can see the causal connection between ethno-religious centric politics, religious radicalization, and securitization or militarization of the state. So these are very clearly indicating the causal connection. And the counter radicalization programs must be structured by an intellectual understanding of the environment in which radicalization takes place in Sri Lanka. That is actually largely in the Sri Lankan context. We do not have much empirical and theoretical evidence with regards to violent extremism and radicalization. And even there is a youth policy in Sri Lanka which was promulgated in 2014. It does not talk about focus on youth violence or radicalization. And the post-war conditions, it's very clear, have not significantly improved in curbing the push factors for violent radicalization in Sri Lanka. So we need to have better understanding, better research and thinking both empirically and conceptually to measure preventive measures, to think about, to design preventive measures to fight against radicalization and violent activism in the post-war context in Sri Lanka. This is very common to other South Asian countries as well. So radicalization is a multi-determined and is driven and sustained by multiple forces, not by one single factor. So in this presentation, I have discussed only the push factor. There could be some other concealed factors that is more likely to push radicalization among youth in the Sri Lankan context. And at the same time, this conference is about digital transformation and AI. But we need to do some other research, new research, how this youth radicalization can be handled or dealt with using AI and digital transformation. We don't have any evidence with regards to AI and digital transformation with youth radicalization. So with that note, I stop. Thank you.